There is a cardboard box of cassette tapes sitting right now in the far corner of this room, shoved back into the angle of the walls where the lamplight doesn't quite reach. They've been sitting there for years, collecting a fine, undisturbed layer of gray dust that seems almost protective, like a velvet shroud draped over a miniature, forgotten graveyard. I don't know why I keep them. I don't even possess a functioning tape player anymore. Just an old, impossibly heavy silver deck with a broken rubber drive belt that makes a mournful, mechanical whining sound when you press play. It sounds like a machine trying to remember how to breathe, a desperate, scraping intake of air that never quite catches. But every now and then, at an hour exactly like this one, when the traffic has died down to a whisper and the rest of the world has fallen away into sleep, I pick up one of those plastic rectangles and just hold it in the palm of my hand. I look at the handwriting on the J card, usually some hurried, fading blue ink detailing a mix for a late night car ride that happened 20 years ago to a place I can't quite recall, with people whose faces have begun to blur and soften around the edges of my memory. It is a profoundly strange feeling, holding that little plastic shell. If you sit with it long enough, you realize the impossible weight of what you are actually holding. Everything that was said that day in the background of those recordings, all the overlapping, spontaneous laughter, the sharp, sudden arguments, the hiss of the tires on wet pavement, the music playing softly on the dashboard, the literal intakes of breath taken between spoken words. It's all still there. It never actually left. It didn't dissipate into the atmosphere. It is physically printed onto that thin, fragile ribbon of brown iron oxide, a microscopic landscape of magnetic peaks and valleys waiting in the absolute dark of the plastic spool. And there's a phenomenon with old magnetic tape called print-through. It's where the tape is wound so tightly for so long that the magnetic charge from one layer bleeds through to the layer beneath it. And when you play it, you hear a faint, ghostly pre-echo of the music before the actual song begins. The tape is literally absorbing its own memory. It's a kind of terrifying permanence. We move through our days thinking of sound as fleeting, as something ephemeral that vanishes into the ether the exact moment the physical vibration stops, but it doesn't. It just hides. It finds a surface to cling to. It embeds itself in the rust and the dust. And it waits with infinite, terrifying patience for someone to build the right machine to let it speak again. In a world full of noise, trust the signal. If you're hearing this, you've already found it. This is Dove and Serpent Radio. We often think of human memory as a a digital archive, something cleanly cataloged, neatly categorized, filed away in sterile folders, and instantly retrievable on demand. But I think memory, real memory, is far more acoustic than that. It's more physical, more resonant. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio, and tonight, as the shadows lengthen across the studio floor and the ambient temperature begins to drop, we are thinking about fossil sounds. There is an urban legend in acoustic archaeology, one of those beautiful, haunting fringe theories that sits right on the edge of the jagged, bleeding edge between high strangeness and historical romance. It suggests that the ancient world accidentally recorded itself on pottery. The idea is that as a potter spun a wet clay vase on the wooden, kick wheel, long ago in a sun-drenched, dust-choked workshop in Rome, or perhaps during the firing process of a pre-Columbian vessel in the deep Americas, the ambient noises of the room were physically captured. The overlapping, casual conversations of the artisans, the rhythmic, metallic scraping of the bronze tools, the sudden, violent crackle of the kiln fire, the distant barking of a dog in the street outside. All of it inadvertently recorded into the microscopic grooves of the spinning wet clay by the potter's stiff stylus, or even their own fingernail. Exactly like a primitive record needle. Imagine it for a moment. Just sit with that image in the dark. Imagine if we could develop a laser sensitive enough to scan those microscopic, uneven imperfections, to map that physical topography of dried mud without destroying it, and then mathematically play back the sound of a workshop from 2,000 years ago. What would we actually hear? Would it just be the deafening white noise of ancient friction? Or would it be a fragment of a forgotten work song, a shouted joke between friends whose bones have long turned to ash, a moment of profound, quiet boredom from a life entirely erased by the relentless march of time? We pull ice cores from the glaciers in Antarctica to trap microscopic bubbles of air, allowing us to literally breathe the atmosphere of the Earth from a million years ago. Why shouldn't we be able to hear it? It's the purest, most desperate dream of the historian, to touch the past without filtering it through the inherent bias and translation of the written record, to bypass the scribes and the emperors, to hear the original raw signal before the overwhelming noise of time corrupted it completely. It brings us back to the question of what we are actually receiving when we sit in the dark, staring at an unmoving speaker cone and listening to a voice coming from nowhere. Long before the radio, long before we understood how to throw our voices across oceans on invisible waves of energy, we were already trying to capture the ghost in the machine. 10 years before Thomas Edison filed his famous patent for the phonograph, a French printer and bookseller invented something called the phonautograph. He wasn't trying to make a machine that could play back sound. That wasn't even a concept his mind could hold. The idea of audio playback was as foreign to him as time travel. He just wanted to visualize waves. He wanted to see the hidden mathematical architecture of human speech. He created this bizarre contraption of a device with a large horn-shaped funnel that focused sound waves onto a parchment diagram, which in turn moved a stiff, carefully plucked pig's bristle. That bristle scratched a continuous, wavering line onto a hand-cranked rotating cylinder of paper covered in this dense lamb-black soot. He simply wanted to look at the geometry of language. And they found his phonautograms stored away and completely forgotten in a dusty Paris archive just a few decades ago. And using modern image processing, lasers, and these complex acoustic simulation algorithms, scientists managed to play the soot. They scanned the scratchy, erratic, two-dimensional lines and translated the visual image of the sound back into a three-dimensional audio wave. The earliest recording we have of a human voice, made in 1860, just 10 seconds long. It's a ghostly, warbling, deeply pitch-shifting voice singing the words to an old French folk song. It's utterly terrifying to listen to in the quiet of the night. It doesn't sound like a human being. It sounds like the wind desperately trying to learn language. It sounds like an entity speaking through a veil of thick, dark water, struggling to break the surface. It is a scream tearing through time, stripped of all recognizable humanity, except for the raw, desperate intent to create a pattern. It is the sound of a dead man who didn't even know he was being recorded, who was just trying to see what his voice looked like on a piece of smoked paper. The obsession with the disembodied voice goes deeper than mere science. When early inventors were first playing with the telegraph and the radio, there was a profound overlap with the spiritualist movement. They didn't fully understand the invisible spectrum of frequencies they were tapping into. To them, pulling a voice out of thin air via an antenna felt indistinguishable from magic. It felt like necromancy. Thomas Edison himself, in his later years, was reportedly working on a device he called the spirit phone, a highly sensitive valve machine designed specifically to record the voices of the dead. He believed that personality, like energy, could not be created or destroyed, only transformed. He thought that if he could build an acoustic receiver sensitive enough he could tune into the frequency of the afterlife. He thought the static between the stations wasn't empty space. He thought it was the crowded, overlapping chatter of the departed, waiting for a microphone delicate enough to separate their voices from the cosmic noise. And we instinctively hold on to these things, don't we? We guard the signals, these fragile, deteriorating echoes of presence, as if they were sacred texts. For the magic makers listening tonight, you know the exact, specific feeling of finding an old, answering machine in a junk drawer or a cardboard box in the attic. The tiny plastic micro cassettes that used to click into place with the satisfying, heavy, mechanical snap. You push play. The tape engages with an audible hiss of friction, and you hear a voice that has been gone from this earth for 10 years, casually telling you to pick up some milk on the way home, or complaining about the weather, or just leaving a long, heavy, silent message after the beep. The physical static of that tape, the underlying hiss of the room tone, the subtle, wobbly distortion of the wow and flutter as the tape struggles over the magnetic heads. It becomes as familiar and comforting as the voice itself. That static is the signature of time trying to erase the presence, and the voice is the presence refusing to leave. The answering machine was a mechanical guardian of the threshold between the sanctuary of the home and the infinite void of the outside world. It caught the voices of the people who were trying to reach you, holding them in magnetic suspension until you were ready to receive them. Sometimes I think the universe is exactly like that. Just a vast, infinitely layered shortwave radio band. And we are all just fragile receivers wrapped in flesh and bone, blindly spinning the dial in the dark, trying to filter out the cosmic noise, to find the specific frequency that matters to us. But what happens when the station permanently stops broadcasting? Where does this signal actually go? Does it keep expanding outward into the freezing, breathless void of space, bouncing off the ionosphere, traveling past the Kuiper Belt, expanding forever until it loses all meaning? Or does it eventually collapse under its own weight, becoming a permanent part of the background hum of the cosmos, waiting for a memory thick enough or a heart heavy enough to catch it again? Consider the Voyager Golden Record. In 1977, we strapped a gold-plated copper phonograph record to the outside of 2 space probes and shot them out into the absolute dark. And on those records, etched into the metal, are greetings in 55 languages, the sound of a mother kissing her child, the sound of wind, rain, and a heartbeat. And nestled in those grooves is a recording of Blind Willie Johnson playing the blues song, "Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground," a wordless, agonizing moan of human loneliness and sorrow. That physical record is currently over 15 billion miles away from Earth, drifting through interstellar space, completely surrounded by the silent violence of the cosmos. The probe is dead. Its cameras are blind. Its thrusters are cold. But the record is still there. We sent our deepest loneliness out into the dark, hoping that maybe, billions of years from now, some alien needle might find the groove, and they might hear a man from Texas crying out in the dark, and they might understand what it felt like to be human. We broadcast our presence because we are terrified of the silence. But there is no such thing as true silence anyway. Even when the world stops making noise, the architecture continues to speak. Have you ever stood in an entirely empty room in a house you've just moved into, or a house that you're about to leave forever? The room isn't quiet. It has what audio engineers call room tone. It's the distinct acoustic fingerprint of the space itself. The way the drywall absorbs the ambient hum of the refrigerator 2 rooms over, the way the glass in the windows slightly vibrate in sympathy with the wind outside. The way the hardwood floor reflects the sound of your own breathing. Every single room has a resonant frequency, a pitch at which it naturally vibrates. In the 1950s, the composer John Cage visited an anechoic chamber at Harvard University. It's a room designed to absorb all sound, to create absolute, objective silence. He went inside and closed the heavy, soundproof door. He stood in the pitch black for a long time, and he realized he wasn't hearing silence. He heard 2 distinct sounds, one high-pitched and one low-pitched. The engineer later explained to him that the high sound was his own nervous system operating, the electricity firing in his brain and spine. The low sound was his own blood circulating through his body. Silence does not exist. We are simply deaf to the constant noise of our own biology until the world shuts up long enough for us to hear it. And that leads you down a very strange, shadowy path when you begin to consider the architecture of the very technology we are using to connect right now. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio. And we're looking at the uncanny, unsettling aspects of connection. Think about numbers stations. If you've never stumbled upon one while spinning the physical shortwave dial late at night, letting the static wash over you like ocean water, you have missed a fundamental, chilling experience of modern mystery. They're these bizarre, unlisted, unregulated radio stations that pop up on unexpected frequencies, operating without call signs, without DJs, without commercial breaks. They broadcast nothing but a synthesized, artificially cheerful voice, sometimes a woman, sometimes a child, reading endless, monotonous sets of numbers, 40085. Sometimes they just broadcast a simple, deeply unsettling, repeated nursery rhyme played on a music box or a series of rhythmic, mechanical tones that sound like a submarine pinging the abyss. Most people with their sensible daylight brains, assume they are just spy transmissions. Old school analog espionage. Yeah. One-time pads encoded in the simplest, most unbreakable way possible. Broadcast blindly into the atmosphere to sleeper agents hiding out in, foreign cities. And maybe that's what they are. Maybe that's what they were in the beginning. But here's the thing that keeps me awake when I stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Many of them are still going right now. The Cold War ended decades ago. The maps of the world have been completely redrawn. The empires have fractured and shifted, but UVB-76, notoriously known as the buzzer, still drones on endlessly from some swampy, heavily guarded marshland in Russia. It emits a relentless, grating, mechanical hum 24 hours a day, interrupted only occasionally by live Russian voices suddenly breaking through the static to read lists of names and numbers into the void before returning to the drone. Why keep them going? In an era of heavily encrypted digital communication, in a world of invisible satellites and deep-sea fiber optic cables, why use noisy, unreliable, analog shortwave technology? Maybe they aren't for spies anymore. Maybe they serve a completely different purpose. Maybe they are reality feedback loops, calibrations for the grid. Maybe they are deliberately broadcasting absolute structured nonsense into the atmosphere to drown out the other signals, the ones that leak from the cracks in the universe, the ones that bleed through the thin spots in the dimensional wall, the ones that might actually change something fundamental about our understanding of reality, if we ever heard them clearly. They are the structural white noise that keeps the heavy, grinding machine of our reality running on its tracks. Without the buzzer, maybe the sky falls down. Do you remember landline static? The specific, humid, almost electrical sound of an old telephone line when no one on the other end was speaking. It wasn't the dead, compressed silence of a dropped phone call. It was the active, crackling, pressurized presence of a physical connection stretching across miles of buried copper wire. It was a hum that felt distinctly alive, like a sleeping animal curled up in the receiver. If you listened closely, pressing the plastic hard against your ear, you could hear other conversations sometimes, faint cross-line interference bleeding through the degraded wires, ghostly, disembodied voices talking about just mundane things, groceries, weather, doctor's appointments, things you weren't ever meant to know. My friend told me a story about that static once, and I've never been able to shake it. I carried it around like a stone in my shoe. Years after his grandmother passed away, in a moment of desperate late-night nostalgia that slowly metastasized into an unshakable obsession, he used to call her old landline phone number. He knew it would be disconnected. He knew he would just get the rapid-fire, aggressive, screeching tones of a dead line or the sterile, automated, recorded voice telling him this number is no longer in service. But one night, at an hour much like this, with a storm brewing on the horizon, he called. And the network didn't give him a recording. It just rang and rang 10, 15 times, the sound echoing out into some unknown nowhere. And then, with a heavy, physical, definite click, the receiver picked up. He said it was the deepest, most suffocating static he had ever heard in his life. It wasn't just sound. It was a physical pressure against his eardrum, a heaviness that immediately filled the room, making the air feel thick and hard to breathe. He whispered, "Grandma," into the plastic mouthpiece, and the static immediately reacted. It got louder. It became more defined, gathering itself out of the chaos, coalescing, forming a distinct, intentional acoustic shape for 5 excruciating seconds. A shape that sounded exactly like a long, trembling, rattling exhale of breath, exhaled directly against the microphone. And then, with a harsh mechanical snap, it clicked back to a dial tone. Was it just a glitch in an aging, switching station in a forgotten basement of the telecom company? The logical brain, the daylight brain that demands order and reason, says yes, just crossed wires, decaying infrastructure, and a heavy dose of grief, causing auditory, pareidolia. But the heart, sitting completely alone in the dark at 2:17 a.m., doesn't operate on switching station logic. It operates on recognition. It recognizes the specific, undeniable frequency of who we were desperately waiting for. Sometimes, though, the signal doesn't need technology at all. It doesn't need miles of copper wire, or brittle iron oxide tape, or towering shortwave transmitters blinking with red aviation lights in the middle of a dark field. It uses the oldest, most complex, and most sophisticated receiver we possess, the human body itself. I was reading a medical journal recently about a woman, a brilliant, world-renowned percussionist, who has been functionally completely deaf since she was a teenager due to a degenerative nerve condition. She doesn't hear music with her ears. They're dead to the world. But she still plays with world-class orchestras. How? She refuses to wear shoes when she performs. She stands barefoot on the wooden stage so she can physically feel the deep, resonant, concussive thud of the bass drum vibrating up through the floorboards and into the soles of her feet. She touches the cold metal rim of the snare drum to feel the sharp, biting snap of the sticks. She hears the complex symphony entirely through her skin, through the density of her bones, through the water vibrating in her cells, through the ancient coiled serpent of her nervous system that was out there interpreting the physical world millions of years before evolution ever decided that sound exclusively meant what the ears do. We rely so much on these two delicate, fleshy cups on the sides of our heads, But sound is not just auditory. It's a total, unavoidable, full-body sensory immersion. It's a literal, physical vibration of the matter around us. The air is pushed, and it pushes against you. When you walk into a room and feel the ambient temperature suddenly, inexplicably drop 10 degrees, or you feel the tiny hairs on the back of your neck and arms stand up right before a violent thunderstorm breaks across the valley, or you feel that sudden, sickening, heavy drop in your gut when you stand in the narrow, shadowed hallway of a certain old, empty house. You aren't sensing a ghost in the cheap, theatrical Hollywood sense. You're feeling a frequency. You are interacting with a physical vibration that is too low, too dense, or too old for the eardrums to pick up. But that the deep, primitive animal within you, the one buried in the brainstem that knows exactly how to survive in the dark, the one that remembers the saber-toothed tigers, translates directly, violently, into dread. Your body is a tuning fork for the unseen world. And then, of course, there is the grandest, most maddening mystery of all, the hum. A documented, highly investigated, worldwide phenomenon of a persistent, low-frequency noise that only about 2 or 4% of the global population can hear. It happens in Taos, New Mexico. It happens in Bristol, England. It happens in Auckland, New Zealand. It's usually heard indoors, almost always at night, when the rest of the world quiets down and the ambient noise floor drops. Some people describe it as the sound of a distant, massive, heavy-duty diesel engine idling continuously, just like one street over. Others describe it as a constant thrumming, vibrating pulse that feels less like an acoustic sound you hear and more like a physical, heavy presence, trying to slowly and methodically squeeze the air from the room, making their ears pop and their teeth ache. Scientists have done extensive, well-funded studies. They have swept affected neighborhoods with these really sensitive, audio equipment things, deployed directional microphones. They shut off power grids. And almost invariably, they can't find a single external source. It isn't industrial machinery operating secretly. It isn't a faulty electrical power substation. It isn't high-pressure gas lines or heavy traffic. It seems to completely bypass the external world. It seems to originate from inside the architecture of the building itself, or perhaps far more disturbingly, from inside the actual skull of the listener. Now, if you're one of the ones who can hear it, magic makers, if you're sitting there nodding your head right now, you know exactly how maddening and isolating it is. It cuts you off from the rest of humanity because you can't record it on your phone to prove it's real. You can't measure it with a decibel app. You can't make your spouse or your children sitting in the exact same room hear it, no matter how hard you try to explain it. You look crazy. But there it is. It is the undeniable, heavy signal of something massive running in the background. Something hidden, something operating just beneath the thin, fragile surface tension of the recognizable world. Is it the tectonic plates grinding together miles below the crust? Is it the resonant frequency of the Earth's electromagnetic field? Or is it something older, something watching, something breathing? For whatever bizarre cosmic reason, you are the only one tuned into its specific, terrifying frequency. You are the antenna it chose. The sky's turning a very deep, bruised, violent purple outside the studio window right now. The thick, oppressive silence of the deep night is reasserting itself, pressing back against the cool glass of the window panes. The city outside looks like a graveyard of concrete and sleeping bodies. We are all swimming in an infinite, churning sea of frequencies, a vast, unimaginably complex, invisible ecology of sound, memory, decay, and presence. Most of it is just noise, but the chaotic, meaningless friction of a heavy world spinning blindly in the dark. But occasionally, if you're quiet, if you're patient, if the internal conditions of your mind are exactly right, and the atmospheric veil between worlds thins out just enough, the signal comes through, clear and undeniable. It might be the haunting, warped ghost of a French folk song from 1860 trapped in the soot of a madman's invention. It might be the deep, unexplainable structural hum of the universe itself, vibrating directly in your jawbone. It might be the sudden, sharp, heartbreaking memory of a voice trapped on a degrading plastic cassette tape sitting in a dusty box in the corner of a quiet room. It might be the heavy, wet exhale of static on a dead phone line. Don't be afraid of the static. Don't shy away from the cross-line interference. Don't try to clean up the audio of your life. That static, that interference, that hiss and pop and hum, that is where the reality actually lives. The bright, loud, structured noise of the daytime is just a mask, a loud, colorful distraction designed to keep us from noticing the profound, heavy, terrifying fullness of the night. Hold on to the vibrations you feel in your bones. Trust your internal tuning. You're picking up exactly what you're meant to pick up. Take one last deep breath of the night's deep, resonant vibration before the morning noise starts to bleed back into the world, before the trucks start rolling and the alarms start ringing. Feel the heavy gravity holding you down in your chair, keeping you tethered to the earth. Feel the blood rushing through your ears. Feel the microscopic atoms of your own body humming along in perfect, silent synchronization with the cold starlight millions of miles above your head. You're not just observing the network, listening from the outside. You're part of it. You are the receiver. Keep the dial exactly where it is. Stay strange in the silence. And keep the dial somewhere between wonder and understanding.